When looking for land, you've perhaps gone on to the likes of Rightmove, Prime Location, Zoopla, and you might have been shocked at the prices that you've been expected to pay and wonder how they arrive at that price for simply a piece of land. I mean, after all, a piece of agricultural land in the UK today is somewhere between 5 and 10,000, and yet when it seems to have a bit of planning on it, it just seems to skyrocket. So why is it so expensive to buy that land, and how did they come to determine that that was the value for that piece of land? And often you'll find in Facebook forums that people talk about build costs because they've bought the piece of land and they're trying to make the thing work, and they're finding it kind of difficult to make it work with all the figures that they've got. And so they start to ask the questions, how much was your build cost? And you'll see people will reply with different figures of how much their build costs were, and some people will then quote, oh wow, that person did really well to get it at that price, a build cost, because mine cost so much more. Build cost is actually kind of irrelevant, because build cost is particular to you and your development, and depending on what part of the country you're at, materials will cost different amounts, labor rates will be different depending on your negotiating skills, how much you've negotiated, depending on what route you've taken to build that particular property, whether you've just farmed out a turnkey and asked somebody just simply to hand you the keys at the end of the project, or whether you have project managed it yourself. And if you're a self-builder, maybe you've actually undertaken some of the work. So that all those will affect the build cost. So build cost is something that you really need to know before you start to buy a piece of land and start looking for a piece of land. So in this video, we're going to explain all of that and why this matters, because it really does matter that you know the build cost before you find the piece of land. But this video is not about build costs, it's about how to value a piece of land. And so if you're new to the channel, my name is Jim J. Davidson, and I've been involved in property since a very early age, in fact age 16, when my brother and I bought a property in the student area of Edinburgh in 1973. My current company, Fineside Developments, was established in 2003, and we developed our first house in 2006 and have been in property development in terms of new builds ever since then. And so this channel is dedicated to showing you the complete process of how to build a house from scratch, from finding the land to putting the keys in your customer's hands. Now, when I say building a house, of course, it's much more than that. It's then moving on to build many houses. So we have a formula that we talk about, which is the 1, 2, 5. So once you've built one, next time you can build 2, and then you can build 5. So you very quick progression in your property business.
For context, we are in the find it phase, and we're going to talk about the deal stage, although we will briefly talk about detect, detail and acquire as it relates to the deal stage.
So in the context part, I mentioned that we're essentially going through 4 of the stages of the Build It and Prosper roadmap. But today we're really going to focus on the part where we've established that we have a deal, that's something that works. So first of all, we'll talk about the first part. So you've got to find your piece of land, and that can be on market, can be off market. So there's various techniques in order to do that. The second is that when you think you've got a likely piece of land, you then need to go through a detailed checklist. Now I have a checklist which I'll make available to you at the end of this video. I'll tell you where you can get a hold of your own personal copy of that. But you go through that checklist, and the idea of going through that checklist is to identify any cost implications that there may be there for you. So as you go through that, you will establish certain things. Now that's important, because when you come to the point of when you are looking to finalize the deal and how much you're going to pay for, or consider whether that piece of land is even worth buying, you need to know what the cost implications are. There's another part which goes a little bit further ahead actually in the process of the roadmap, which is planning. And now one of the things that I always find quite strange is that people think that when a piece of My phone just fell, incidentally, that's what the noise was. So the reason my phone fell was that I use it when lining up the video camera, and somebody was calling me and it kept vibrating, so that's why it fell. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we've established that there's certain cost implications, and now we're going to look at the model for valuing a piece of land. And so if we imagine, the first thing that we would need to establish is, if we were to, and let's just take a single house build, we're going to build a particular house on that piece of land. What we need to know is, what's that going to sell for? So what is the likely selling price? So we're going to put that at the top here of the diagram. And let's just say, for ease of figures, that it is 400,000 that we're going to sell that. The next part is, so that's the sales price. Now, of course, we don't know whether it will sell for that, and depending on what the market's doing at a particular time, we may exceed that. If we're in a rising market, if we're in a falling market, then we may find that we don't quite get that figure. And for that reason, particularly if it falls, and because there may be cost implications, we have to have a reasonable margin. And so you'll hear a lot of people talking about the profit margin in the industry being around 25%. So let's say 25% is the margin. So therefore, that is £100,000 profit. And so that gives us a reasonable buffer. We're obviously hoping to achieve that. And remember, margin is always on the selling price, not to be confused with markup. Markup is when you take a cost and then you add the value. So adding 25% to a value would not give you that. So in other words, if the total cost was 300,000 and you added 25% of that, then you'd only come out at 380. So you're actually losing 20,000. So it's very important that you understand the margin is always on the end selling price. So then we have the next thing, which is going to be the build cost. And let's assume that the build cost is going to be 200,000. Now, in that build cost, and you can have different ways of working this, should include absolutely everything. But it could be just the raw build costs, in which case you'd have to have a second category, which you would call preliminaries. But for ease of simplicity, we will have that. Now, if the land has no planning in place, then we're going to have to allow for the planning fees. We're going to have to allow for any sort of reports that might be required, such as a contamination survey. And that's where the plot checklist comes in, because you identify all the different things that might be required, perhaps a coal report, an intrusive coal report if it's in an area where there's been a lot of mining activity in the past, and perhaps a seam runs nearby or underneath the piece of land that you're looking to buy. So you need to understand that, and is there likely to be therefore gaps in the ground which need to be filled with concrete? What is the ground conditions like? So all of those things need to be included in this, and you identify the cost implications by looking at the plot checklist and all the things that you've identified. And therefore then you have the land cost. So that would therefore value that piece of land at 100,000. Now, you will also would have a contingency in there. But let's assume that your build costs were 250,000 when you have identified anything. Then the land is now only worth 50,000. So what happens if a vendor who's trying to sell you that piece of land for 100,000, and you know that the build costs are going to be 250, you know that you need to get your £100,000 property, and that is all that the property is going to sell for, then you need to talk to them about this figure here, because this does not work. Because if you pay 100,000 for it, that 50,000 is going to come out of there, and you've only got now a 12.5% return on your investment, and that's just too tight. So unless they're willing to negotiate on that, then you're going to have to withdraw from that particular one. Now, having said that, the 100,000 would not be payable if so in this instance, you wouldn't be paying 100,000 if that land had no sort of planning in place. So even though you've built in the costs of your planning in there, there is a point where you need to assess the risk to reward. So you could spend 10,000, 15,000 on gaining planning if there's no planning in place, and not get planning. And so therefore, the discussion with the vendor would be, if you're going to get all the planning, then I will pay you the 100,000. In other words, I will have no risk, but I will pay you, once you've got everything in place, the 100,000. However, if you want me to take on some of that risk, in other words, all the risk, then we need to be looking at a return for that risk. So the discussion then becomes, how much risk are you willing to take, and how much are you asking me to take? And that will determine what this figure is. Now, I can't give you that figure, but that's a judgment that you're going to have to make in terms of how much risk you are prepared to take for the reward of getting the planning in place. So it's vitally important that you work through those figures and you have that discussion. And if they really are sticking with that because a surveyor has told them that's how much it's valued at, then it's time to look for something else, because those do not work for you. And particularly if you half your profit here, and even if you achieve it, and you might think, well, I'm quite happy with 50,000, or if this was an 800,000, 100,000, I'm quite happy with that as a cash profit. It's going to inhibit your growth and your ability to move on to the next project. Now, if you're a self-builder, you might be thinking, well, actually, I don't need to be making a profit. I beg to differ. You do need to be making a profit. Now, you may determine that you're going to spend some of that profit on the build itself. So you might decide, instead of having some sort of basic countertop in your kitchen, you're going to have marble countertops. You may decide to upgrade throughout the house with different things. But that's coming out of your profit, and you've decided, because it's your house, you're living in it, and you want a certain quality of house, of how that's going to look. So you then are spending some of that profit, but you still should be making a profit, because you are still a developer, even though you're developing it for yourself. So you should not be spending over it. So it's very important that you get that amount of money right when you come to purchasing the land. What I'm going to do, just before I forget, I did say that I would tell you where to get the plot checklist, and it's at www.plotchecklist.com, and I'll put that up on the banner and also in the description below. What I was going to say is that next Friday it will be Christmas Day, and so my Christmas present to you is to take you through a video a day of each of the 9 steps of the Build It and Prosper roadmap. So starting on Christmas Day, and you're probably not going to watch it necessarily on Christmas Day, but if you get bored, then there's a video for you, and each day after that, which will then take us up to the 2nd of January, so that's Saturday the 2nd of January, there'll be a video a day explaining each of the 9 steps of the Build It and Prosper roadmap. If you have new to this channel and you haven't already subscribed, then please hit that subscribe button, and if you like the video, please give it a like on the like below and tell your friends. And I also want to just give a big thank you to all those people who subscribed. We were looking to have 100 subscribers before the end of the year. We achieved that goal, so thank you to all our subscribers for taking us there. We've now managed to name the channel Build It and Prosper. So it's build it, build it with an and as opposed to ampersand. So it's build it and prosper. So if you want to share that with anybody, I would love you to do that. And just one final thing is I wish you a very Merry Christmas if I don't speak to you on Christmas Day, and a great New Year. And I look forward to speaking to you on the next video.